Cole Brennan's fingers tightened around the deed as dust settled in the Nevada yard. The ranch house should have been abandoned. Instead, 3 women waited on the porch like judges at a sentencing. The tallest stepped into the sunlight, her muscular frame casting a shadow that reached halfway to his horse. "Cole Brennan," she said, not a question, a statement. Her voice carried the kind of certainty that made men nervous. He hadn't told anyone his name. The poker game in Carson City had been private. 5 men, a back room, no witnesses, yet somehow she knew. The other 2 moved to flank her. All 3 towered over 6 feet, their bodies carved from hard labor and harder choices. They watched him the way wolves watch a wounded elk, patient, calculating, already certain of the outcome. 3 days of riding through Nevada wilderness had brought him here. 3 days dreaming about the fresh start this property represented. A chance to escape the noise and complications of Carson City, to build something alone, on his own terms, standing in this isolated yard with 3 strangers who knew his name, who'd been waiting for him. That solitude suddenly felt less like freedom and more like a noose tightening. "I think there's been some confusion, ladies." Cole kept his voice level, his hand resting casually near his rifle. "This property is mine now. Won it fair and square. I have the paperwork to prove it." The woman's smile spread slow and deliberate. "Too many teeth. Too much knowing. Oh, we're well aware of your poker game, Mr. Brennan. We know exactly how you won this place." She took 1 step down from the porch. "And we know what comes with it." The other women moved in perfect synchronization. Practiced. Rehearsed. How long had they been here? And, more importantly, why? Duncan Hayes made certain promises before he lost everything at that card table. The redhead on the right spoke up. Her voice carried an edge that had nothing to do with volume. "Promises that don't disappear just because he couldn't cover his bets." Cole's gut twisted Duncan Hayes, the desperate gambler who'd thrown in this deed during the final hand. The man who'd smiled that strange, knowing smile when Cole raked in his winnings. The man who'd vanished into the Carson City not before the sun rose. That smile made sense now. Hayes hadn't lost. He'd escaped, and Cole had taken his place. Cole's hand froze halfway to his rifle as the implications of the woman's words sank in. This wasn't some crude proposition from lonely frontier women. The way they stood, the confidence in their voices, and the casual mention of arrangements with the previous owner, everything pointed to something far more complex and dangerous than simple intimidation. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Cole said, forcing steel into his voice despite the uncertainty churning in his gut. "But I won this land fair and square in a poker game, and I'm not going anywhere." He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening, while maintaining eye contact with the leader. The tall woman chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Game? Oh, Cole, this isn't a game at all. This is business." She gestured toward the ranch house with a sweep of her muscular arm. "See, the man who lost you this property in that poker game owed us something, a debt that doesn't disappear just because he gambled away the deed." The redhead stepped forward, her boots heavy on the porch steps. "Duncan Hayes made promises he couldn't keep, said he'd work the land with us, be our partner in more ways than one." Her green eyes fixed on Cole with unsettling intensity. "When that didn't work out, the deed specifically transferred his obligations to whoever won the property. That would be you." Cole felt the first real stab of panic. Duncan Hayes. That was the man's name who had lost everything in that poker game 3 nights ago. The details seemed too specific to be a lie, too personal. How much did these women actually know about the game? The memory came flooding back with crystal clarity now. The smoky back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon in Carson City. 5 men around a table, cards and whiskey flowing freely. Duncan Hayes had been drinking heavily, his desperation evident in every reckless bet. The final hand had been massive. Hayes, down to his last chips, had thrown in a deed. "Everything on that property belongs to the winner," he'd said, his words slurred but his eyes sharp, and then that smirk. That knowing, cunning smirk that Cole had dismissed as drunken bravado. Cole had won with a full house. Hayes had laughed, actually laughed, as he signed over the deed, that same unsettling smirk never leaving his face. Then he disappeared into the night before Cole could even buy him a consolation drink. Now, standing in front of these 3 imposing women, that smirk made terrible sense. Hayes hadn't been beaten. He'd been freed, and Cole had walked right into the trap. Even if that's true, which I doubt, Cole said, though his voice lacked conviction, no man can make promises on behalf of someone else, especially not those kinds of promises. The second woman, darker-haired and broader through the shoulders than the others, laughed. You really don't understand how things work out here, do you? When you're 3 days from Carson City, 5 days from any kind of law, traditional rules don't apply. We make our own arrangements. The way she emphasized arrangements made Cole's skin crawl. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about money or property disputes. These women had created their own system, their own form of control, and somehow his poker win had walked him directly into their web. The deed is legal, Cole insisted, though his confidence was wavering. Filed with the territorial office in Carson City, witnessed, sealed. Whatever Duncan Hayes promised you personally has nothing to do with me. The leader's smile finally faded, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. Legal documents mean nothing out here when you're 3 days from the nearest sheriff and even further from anyone who might care what happens to a stranger. She took a step closer, and Cole was struck by just how imposing she was, easily 6 feet tall with arms that spoke of years of hard physical labor. Besides, the redhead added, pulling a folded paper from her pocket, we have our own paperwork, contracts Duncan signed, agreements that specifically mention the transfer of obligations to any future owner. Cole's heart sank as he recognized what looked like official letterhead. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that made his poker win seem less like luck and more like an elaborate trap. Had Duncan Hayes deliberately lost to him? Set him up to take on whatever burden these women represented? But there was something else in their demeanor, something he couldn't quite identify beneath the intimidation and threats, a vulnerability, almost, a longing, the way the leader's eyes lingered on him, and the subtle tension in the redhead's stance. There were layers to the situation he didn't understand yet. My name is Victoria, the leader said, her tone shifting to something almost conversational. This is Elizabeth. She nodded toward the dark-haired woman, and Charlotte. The redhead gave a small wave that somehow managed to be both friendly and threatening. We've been waiting for you for 3 days, Cole. Duncan described you perfectly before he left town. The casual use of his first name sent another chill through him. How much had Duncan told them? What other details about his life did they know? Whatever Duncan told you about me, he had no right, Cole said. I won this property in good faith, and I'm not bound by any agreements he made. Victoria's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, Cole caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath the intimidating exterior. Good faith, she repeated, almost wistfully. That's refreshing. Duncan wasn't much for good faith, especially toward the end. She studied Cole's face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. You're different from him, quieter, more substantial. Elizabeth circled around to Cole's left side, moving like a predator but with an odd gentleness in her eyes. Duncan was all charm and promises at first, swept in here talking about partnership, about building something together. 3 months later, he was already looking for an exit strategy. He used us, Charlotte added, her voice carrying a hurt that surprised Cole. Took advantage of our hospitality, our work, our... She paused, searching for the right word. Our affections, then decided it was too much trouble and gambled away the land we improved. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a clearer picture, though it wasn't one that made Cole feel any safer. These women weren't just squatters or con artists. They had been betrayed by Duncan Hayes, and now they saw Cole as either their salvation or their revenge. So you see, Victoria continued, moving closer until she was close enough that Cole could smell the faint scent of lavender soap on her skin. We have a legitimate claim here, not just to the land, but to what we were promised, what Duncan committed to and then abandoned. Cole found himself studying her face, noticing details he had missed in his initial fear, the way her jaw set when she mentioned Duncan, the slight tremor in her hands when she spoke about betrayal. Whatever had happened between these women and his predecessor, it had left scars that ran deeper than property disputes. But there was something else in the way Victoria looked at him, something that made his pulse quicken despite the dangerous situation. Was it possible that beneath all the intimidation and threats, there was genuine attraction? And, more unsettling still, was he beginning to feel it too? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Cole found himself caught between the rational fear of his situation and an inexplicable pull toward these three women who had upended his carefully planned future. "Show me this contract," Cole said finally, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. "If Duncan really signed something that affects me, I have a right to see exactly what it says." Charlotte unfolded the document with deliberate care, and Cole stepped closer to examine it. The paper was thick, expensive, with Duncan Hayes' signature clearly visible at the bottom alongside an official notary seal from Carson City. But, as Cole read the terms, his confusion deepened rather than clearing. "This is a partnership agreement," he said, looking up at Victoria, "for farming operations, profit sharing, and—" He paused at a particularly unusual clause: "mutual support and companionship for all parties involved." The language was carefully crafted, legally binding, but vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways. Duncan was clever with words, Elizabeth said, moving to stand beside Cole as he read. Her proximity was distracting. She was tall enough that her shoulder nearly brushed his, and he caught the scent of something warm and earthy, like fresh bread and summer rain. He made promises that sounded romantic but were actually business arrangements and vice versa. Victoria watched Cole's face as he processed the document. "The land has been profitable under our management. We've built irrigation systems, improved the soil, established trade relationships with settlements 2 days' ride from here. Duncan benefited from our work for months before deciding he wanted out." But instead of honoring his commitments, Charlotte added, her green eyes flashing with renewed anger, "he found a mark in a poker game and disappeared, leaving us with nothing but a piece of paper that apparently transfers his obligations to whoever won the property." Cole set the contract down carefully, his mind working through the implications. These women had been more than partners to Duncan. They had been lovers, workers, and business associates rolled into one complex relationship, and according to this document, Duncan had legally bound any future property owner to step into his role. "Even if this contract is legitimate," Cole said slowly, "I didn't sign it. I can't be held responsible for agreements made by someone else, no matter what the paperwork says." Victoria's expression shifted, and for a moment, Cole saw past the intimidating facade to something raw and vulnerable. "You're right," she said quietly. "Legally, you're probably not bound by Duncan's promises. But morally, we've invested everything into this land, into this arrangement. We have nowhere else to go." The admission hung in the air between them, changing the entire dynamic of the confrontation. These weren't predators trying to trap him. They were women who had been abandoned and were desperately trying to protect what they had built. Elizabeth stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "We're not asking you to honor every detail of what Duncan promised, but we are asking you to consider that we might be able to build something better together than any of us could alone." Cole felt his resistance wavering as he looked at each of them in turn. Victoria's strength masked a deep loneliness. Elizabeth's quiet confidence couldn't hide the hope in her eyes. Charlotte's fierce independence was built on a foundation of hurt that she was trying desperately to protect. "What exactly are you proposing?" Cole asked, and even as the words left his mouth, he knew he was crossing a line from which there might be no return. The three women exchanged glances, a silent communication that spoke of years of partnership and shared understanding. Victoria stepped forward, her imposing frame somehow less threatening now that Cole understood the pain behind her strength. "We're proposing a real partnership," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Not the half-hearted arrangement Duncan offered, but something genuine. We work the land together, share the profits equally, and—" She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "We share our lives." The weight of her words settled over them like morning mist. Cole found himself studying each woman with new eyes, seeing past the intimidation to the loneliness that had driven them to this desperate gambit. "The three of you," Cole said slowly, testing the waters, "you've been together since Duncan left?" The question carried implications that made his heart race with a mixture of curiosity and unexpected desire. Elizabeth nodded, a faint blush coloring her strong features. "We found comfort in each other after he abandoned us. It started as survival, but it became something more, something we didn't want to lose." Her honesty was disarming, and Cole felt his carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. Charlotte moved to stand beside her companions, creating a united front that was no longer threatening but strangely appealing. "We know how it sounds," she said, her green eyes locked on his. 3 women asking a stranger to join them in something most people would never understand. But out here, conventional rules don't apply. We make our own family, our own bonds. Cole's mind raced through the possibilities and consequences. He had come here seeking solitude and a fresh start. But what they were offering was the opposite: connection, partnership, and an intimacy that went far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The physical aspect, Cole said, his voice rougher than he intended. What would that mean, exactly? The question hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and uncertainty. Victoria's smile returned, but this time it was genuine, reaching her eyes for the first time since he had arrived. It would mean whatever feels natural to all of us, she said simply. No pressure, no demands, just the freedom to explore what develops between us as we build something together. The honesty in her response surprised him. This wasn't about coercion or fulfilling some obligation to Duncan. This was about 4 people finding solace and connection in an isolated world where traditional relationships often meant nothing. And if it doesn't work? Cole asked, though even as he spoke, he could feel his resistance weakening. There was something about the way Elizabeth's eyes softened when she looked at him, the way Charlotte's fierce independence seemed to include space for him, the way Victoria's strength promised protection rather than domination. Then, we figure it out like adults, Elizabeth said simply. But Cole, we've been watching you since you arrived. The way you handle yourself, the respect you showed even when you were frightened. We think it could work. We hope it will. The admission that they had been evaluating him just as much as he had been evaluating them somehow made the proposition feel more balanced, less like a trap, and more like an opportunity. I need to see what you've built here, Cole said finally, his practical nature asserting itself even as his heart raced with possibility. If we're talking about partnership, I need to understand what I'm partnering with. Victoria's relief was visible, though she tried to hide it behind her usual confidence. Of course, Elizabeth, show him the irrigation system you designed. The pride in her voice when she spoke of Elizabeth's accomplishments was unmistakable, and Cole found himself drawn to the genuine affection these women shared for each other. As Elizabeth led him toward the fields, Cole was amazed by the sophistication of the water management system she had created. Channels carved with precision directed water from a natural spring to carefully planned garden plots and grain fields that showed signs of careful cultivation and impressive yields. This represents months of work, Elizabeth explained, her hands gesturing gracefully as she described the engineering challenges she had overcome. Duncan took credit for it when traders came through, but every inch was planned and dug by us. The bitterness in her voice when she mentioned Duncan was matched by the pride she took in her creation. Charlotte joined them as they toured the livestock areas, where healthy cattle grazed in well-maintained pastures, and a small but productive chicken coop provided fresh eggs. We've established trade relationships with 3 different settlements, she explained, her business acumen evident in the way she discussed profit margins and seasonal planning. The operation isn't just sustainable, it's thriving. Cole found himself genuinely impressed by what the 3 women had accomplished. This wasn't just a ranch. It was a carefully planned and expertly managed operation that had the potential to support all of them comfortably. More than that, it represented a level of cooperation and shared vision that he had never experienced. The house, Victoria said as they returned to the main building, has 4 bedrooms. We've been using 3, but we always hoped. She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air between them. As they entered the ranch house, Cole was struck by the warmth and comfort of the space. It wasn't luxurious, but everything was well crafted and carefully maintained. The kitchen was large enough for communal cooking. The sitting area had comfortable furniture arranged for conversation, and everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of the care and attention these women had invested in creating a real home. We're not asking for an answer today, Elizabeth said as they settled in the sitting area, her understanding evident in her gentle tone. This is a big decision, and we want you to be certain before you commit to anything. But, even as she spoke, Cole realized that his decision was already made. The attraction he felt wasn't just physical, though he couldn't deny the way his pulse quickened when Victoria's hand brushed his arm, or how Elizabeth's smile made him feel understood in ways he had never experienced, or how Charlotte's fierce independence drew him like a flame. More than attraction, he felt the pull of belonging. These women had created something remarkable together, and they were offering him the chance to be part of it. The risks were enormous, but so was the potential reward. "There's something else you should know," Victoria said, her tone carrying a weight that made everyone pause. "Duncan left us with more than just broken promises. There are debts he incurred in our names, people who expect payment that we can't provide alone." The admission hit Cole like cold water. "What kind of debts?" he asked, setting down the cup of coffee Elizabeth had poured for him. Charlotte pulled a ledger from a drawer, her expression grim. Supplies he ordered but never paid for. Equipment purchased on credit. He used our reputation with local traders to secure goods, then disappeared before the bills came due. She opened the book, revealing columns of numbers that made Cole's heart sink. Not catastrophic, but significant. "How much?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Enough to ruin us if we can't pay," Elizabeth said quietly. "The traders have been patient because they know our work is good, but patience has limits. If we can't settle these accounts within the month, we'll lose everything we've built here." Cole studied the ledger, his business sense taking over despite the emotional complexity of the situation. The debts were significant, but not insurmountable, especially given the productivity he had witnessed. More importantly, the women's honesty about the financial burden impressed him. They could have hidden this information until after he committed, but instead they were laying all their cards on the table. "Duncan really did a number on you," Cole said, his anger at the absent man growing. "But these numbers, they're manageable with the right approach." He looked up to find all three women watching him hopefully. "I have capital from selling my previous holdings, enough to settle these debts and invest in expanding the operation." The relief on their faces was immediate and overwhelming. Victoria's composure finally cracked, tears she had been holding back for months finally spilling over. Elizabeth reached for his hand, her grip firm and grateful. Charlotte simply nodded, but her eyes spoke volumes about what his offer meant to them. "But I have conditions," Cole continued, his tone growing serious. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Legal partnership papers, clear agreements about responsibilities and decision-making." And he paused, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "We take time to let the personal relationships develop naturally. No pressure, no expectations beyond what feels right to all of us." Victoria wiped her eyes, her smile returning stronger than before. "That's all we ever wanted, Cole. A real partnership with someone who sees us as equals, not objects or conveniences." As the evening deepened, they sat together planning their future financial strategies, expansion plans, trade route improvements. But beneath the practical discussions, Cole felt something else growing, a connection that went beyond business arrangements or survival necessity. When Charlotte's hand briefly touched his as they reviewed the ledger, when Elizabeth's laugh filled the room with genuine joy, when Victoria's eyes met his with something that looked like hope, Cole realized that what had started as the worst surprise of his life might actually be the beginning of the best chapter he had ever lived. 3 months later, Cole stood in the same ranch yard where he had first encountered the three women who had changed his life forever. The operation had expanded beyond their wildest expectations. New livestock, improved irrigation that Elizabeth had refined with his input trade agreements that stretched across 3 territories, thanks to Charlotte's tireless negotiation and his additional capital. The debts Duncan Hayes had left behind were settled within the first month, paid in full with enough left over to invest in quality breeding stock and new equipment. The traders, who had once been skeptical, now sought them out, knowing that the partnership of Cole, Victoria, Elizabeth, and Charlotte delivered quality and reliability. More importantly, the 4 of them had found a rhythm that worked both professionally and personally. Victoria had become his closest confidant in matters of business strategy, her natural leadership complementing his financial acumen. Their relationship had deepened slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine affection that had blossomed into something neither had expected to find. She was fierce and tender by turns, her strength a source of comfort rather than intimidation. Elizabeth's gentle wisdom and innovative thinking had made her indispensable as a partner. The quiet moments they shared working together, solving engineering challenges, planning new projects, had developed into a connection that felt as natural as breathing. Her intelligence attracted him as much as her physical beauty, and she had a way of making him feel understood that he'd never experienced before. Charlotte had been the most cautious about opening her heart again, her fierce loyalty and passionate spirit protected by walls built from Duncan's betrayal. But her protective instincts had eventually given way to trust. The morning she'd first kissed him, spontaneous and unplanned as they worked side by side repairing fence posts, had marked a turning point for all of them. The arrangement that had seemed so impossible on that first day had evolved into something beautiful and functional. They had created their own family, their own rules, their own definition of love that worked for all four of them. There were challenges, certainly, jealousy to navigate when one relationship seemed to be getting more attention, decisions that required consensus from all four partners, the constant awareness that their lifestyle would never be accepted by conventional society, that visitors had to be carefully managed, that their truth could never be fully spoken in towns like Carson City, but the rewards far outweighed the difficulties. The legal papers had been drawn up and signed, creating an official partnership that protected all of their interests. The ranch now operated in the black with healthy profits that they reinvested in both the business and their shared home. More rooms had been added to accommodate their success, including a proper office where they managed their expanding trade relationships. More importantly, Cole had never been happier. The loneliness that had driven him to gamble away his savings in that Carson City poker game had been replaced by a richness of connection he had never imagined possible. Each woman brought something unique to their partnership: Victoria's strength, Elizabeth's innovation, Charlotte's passion, and together they had built something that was greater than the sum of its parts. As evening approached, the four of them gathered on the porch that had been expanded to accommodate their family dinners and evening conversations. The view stretched across fertile fields and healthy pastures, evidence of what they had accomplished together. The Nevada sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the same colors that had greeted Cole 3 months ago when he'd arrived with nothing but a poker-won deed and a heart full of uncertainty. "Any regrets?" Victoria asked, settling beside Cole as Elizabeth and Charlotte joined them with cups of coffee and the comfortable silence that came with complete acceptance. Cole looked at each of them in turn. These remarkable women who had confronted him with an impossible proposition that had turned out to be the answer to questions he hadn't even known he was asking. The conventional life he had planned, the solitary existence he thought he wanted, seemed pale and empty compared to the vivid reality they had created together. "Only one," he said, drawing surprised looks from all three. "I regret that it took Duncan Hayes' betrayal to bring us together. We could have been doing this even longer." Their laughter carried across the evening air and the sound of people who had found exactly where they belonged. Elizabeth leaned her head against a shoulder. "Duncan did us a favor. In the end, he was never going to be what we needed. But you," she smiled up at him, "you were worth waiting for." Charlotte raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "To Duncan Hayes and his smirking face, may he forever wonder what he lost." "And to Cole Brennan," Victoria added, her hand finding his, "who had the courage to see past the threat to the opportunity." As darkness settled over the Nevada ranch, Cole reflected on the strange path that had brought him here. A poker game, a smirking loser, a deed that came with 3 incredible women. It was absurd and unconventional and absolutely perfect. In a world that demanded conformity, they had chosen connection. In a society that insisted on conventional relationships, they had created their own definition of love. And in that choice, they had found something precious and enduring that would sustain them through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. The stars emerged one by one over the Nevada desert, the same stars that had guided him here 3 months ago. But now he wasn't alone beneath them. Now he had Victoria's strength beside him, Elizabeth's wisdom to guide him, Charlotte's passion to inspire him. And that made all the difference. If you enjoyed this story of courage and honor on the frontier, click that subscribe button now. We have dozens more tales of unlikely heroes, dangerous choices, and life-changing decisions waiting for you. Ready for another unforgettable story? Click the video on your screen right now to watch a tale of survival and justice that will stay with you long after it ends. Don't miss it.